My name is Julia Summers. I'm a writer of non-fiction, but I describe myself above all else as a storyteller because I believe in writing. We writers have an urge, a compassion, a compunction even, to write and tell stories. I've been writing as for publication for 20 years, but actually I've been writing all my life. And in this workshop, I'm going to invite you to think about writing as part of your voice. When I say your voice, I mean voice in the way you talk. So very often we think of writing as being an exercise that's private. We do it for ourselves, but actually we're doing it for other people, aren't we? We're telling stories. So in this first exercise that I'm going to set you, I want you to think about finding your own voice. If you're a pianist, you practice. You don't walk up to a piano and expect to be able to play a Chopin nocturne perfectly. You need to practice those scales and arpeggios. It's exactly the same with being a writer. We're not all immediately Hilary Mantel or Philip Pullman or Charles Dickens. So let's see if we can explore and find your writing voice. What I'd like you to do is to take a pen and paper. You can type if you wish, but I find the pen and paper a more honest way of finding the voice. Take a pen and paper, and I want you to start writing a stream of consciousness story. It must be something you're comfortable with, so it can be as simple as what is outside your window, what you will do after this session, or what you do when you go for a walk with your dog. Start writing, and after 1 minute, I'm going to drop in a word, and I want you to incorporate that word in the flow of your writing. Now, the word will be a simple word. For example, if I were to say red, you could use it as in read, I read a book. Or you could use it as in, I saw a red squirrel out of my window. Or red, this spells red for danger. You have that choice. So after 1 minute, you will get a word. And then over the next 5 minutes or so, I will drop in a total of 10 words. And you will write and embed every word into the story that I'm asking you to create. Don't get hung up. Don't worry if it doesn't all make sense. This is all about stopping the terror of the blank page and helping you to find your voice. We're going to blank the screen for the first 1 minute. So off you go, get your pen and paper and start writing now. The first word is light. Feel. Kind. Throw. Charge. lesson, blue, rain, stone, and the last word is tower. So, as and when you're ready to finish, reread what you've written, perhaps even read it out loud. And I think you will find that initially you felt a bit self-conscious and what is Julie asking you to do? But in the end, the tyranny of the words that I'm placing in front of you made you write, made you use those words in a way. You're making the language work for you. And that is so important. And I want you to feel in command of your voice, because it's terribly important that you don't feel afraid of writing. Now, lots of people talk about writer's block and the tyranny of the blank page, as I mentioned. But in the end, this wonderful thing that we do, we writers, we are communicators, and we have this wonderful language of English at our command. And I want you to feel confident to use English. And think about those words I gave you. Lesson. Did you use it as lesson in the sense of giving a lesson in a class? Or did you use it in the sense of lesson as in to diminish? Did you use light as in the sense of it weighs very little? Or did you use light in the sense of turning on a light bulb? You see, English is so rich. And the reason I gave you those words was because you had the choice to use them as you saw fit. So I hope with that exercise, you will just have an inkling of what I'm looking for in your voice, which is the confidence to use the language to your best ends to make it work for you. One of the most powerful ways to start telling a story is to take an object or an image that inspires you and tells you something about life. As an author of nonfiction, I've used this to surprisingly good effect, really. It might be astonishing for you to learn that to take an object and tell a story around it can actually produce some history. But let me show you the most mundane but powerful thing I have in my possession. Here it is. It is a nail, not a normal nail that you'd expect. This is a railway nail, and it was used that way up to hold down a railway girder on the bridge on the Thailand-Burma Railway that we all know as the bridge on the River Kwai. I found that nail on a visit to Thailand when I was doing some research about my grandfather, who was a colonel on the Death Railway from 1942 to 1945, and whose life was immortalized by the French novelist Pierre Boulle in a book called Bridge on the River Kwai, which became the very famous war film, with David Lean directing Alec Guinness as the boneheaded Colonel Nicholson. I had always wanted to tell the story of my grandfather's life on the railway, because the truth is so much more extraordinary than the fiction. And when I went to Thailand, I was very fortunate to meet at the bridge an Australian who had spent almost 40 years researching the story of the railway, and it is he who gave me that nail. And he said, hold that and remember that this nail that weighs 300 grams, so it's not terribly heavy, would have been one of a box of 40 that prisoners starving to death on a rice ration of 600 to 750 calories a day would have had to pick up and carry from a depot to the place on the railway where the nails were used. And it was such a powerful image. And from that nail, my understanding of what those men had been through grew. And I was able to write my grandfather's story with not authentic first-hand experience, because of course I'm not a man, I've not been at war, I was never a prisoner of war, I fortunately have never starved. But I had something tangible that helped me to understand a little bit of what at least the men had handled. So objects can be extraordinarily powerful. When I wrote my first book, which was the biography of Sandy Irvine, who was the und Irvine of Mallory and Irvine, who died on Everest in 1924, I was very short of material because a 22-year-old doesn't really have an enormously long history. And there was little at the Alpine Club and very much less at the Royal Geographical Society about this young man's life. But I remain convinced that his father, who was an amateur historian, would have kept material about Sandy Irvine's life. And indeed, that proved to be the case. And after quite a long search, I found what people can only dream of, which is a trunk in the attic. And it was in the attic of a family home in North Wales. And in this trunk were letters and photographs that Sandy had sent back to his father, William Irvine, over the course of the expedition in 1924. And those letters helped me to construct not only his side of the climb with Mallory, but also his voice, his fears, his passions. So first-hand material, when you're creating a story, is of enormous importance and great value. Now, some of you, I'm sure, will be wanting to write fiction and short stories, but still you can use an object on which to pin a story or a tale, or even an aspect of a tale, because an object can give us the touchy-feely sense of a person in a way that a photograph can, but a photograph is two-dimensional. But an object, say for example, if you're writing about a child in the 19th century, what could be more evocative than a child's gown, a lace-capped hat, for example? If you're writing about somebody who fought in the First World War, imagine if you could get your hands on a letter, any letter that had been written from the trenches. Perhaps it's got a mud stain on it. Perhaps, even rather more sinisterly, it's got a blood stain on it. All of these powerful objects can help us to give 3 dimensions to our stories. Now, I've got a rather random exercise, which I want you to do. And this is all about the power of objects. Imagine that the apocalypse is coming. Real danger. You're in jeopardy. You have to run into your house, which I'm going to grant you has 6 rooms. And I want you to go into each room and pick up one object that you would expect to find in that room. And in one sentence or half a sentence, you're going to tell us or yourself why that object matters. The rooms in your house are kitchen, sitting room, bathroom, bedroom, study, and conservatory. We'll put these up on the screen so you can see them during the exercise. And what I want you to do is I want you to start writing, and you have 60 seconds to race around your house and pick up these objects. Have you got your pen? Are you ready? Steady, go. Next room. Finish. Even if you haven't found all your objects, finish, stop. Have you got them in a basket? It doesn't matter. Have you got those objects safe? What do they tell you? Are they something that remind you of your childhood? Are they something that is random, like a kitchen knife? Why have you picked them up? What do those objects tell you? And can you create a story from them? I'd like to talk a little bit about narrative, because whether you're writing fiction or non-fiction, and you remember I'm a non-fiction writer, you need to think about the voice of the person that you're writing about, as well as your own writing voice. And this is very, very important, because if you're writing about a child, you will use different language and even different description than if you're writing about a very old man. Imagine writing about your grandfather. How would you describe him? You would probably talk about his sparkling eyes, or his wrinkles on his face, or his big ears, because we know that men's ears grow larger as they get older. You might think about his voice, the timbre of his voice, and how that makes you remember him. And you might also think about how he sits in a chair, or used to sit in a chair, if you're the same age as I am. These are very important and evocative, descriptive moments. Now, here's an exercise which I've done several times on Arvon courses I've taught. And it always makes people think. Here we are. You are standing outside a locked or a closed door. You're in a big old house. And I want you to describe knocking on that door, opening the door, walking over the threshold and into a room. It can be a study or a sitting room, but at the other side of the room, at a desk, sitting on a chair with his or her back to you, is a person who you respect, maybe you're slightly in awe of, and they are at this desk looking out of a window. And what I want you to do is I want you to imagine and to describe your feelings, your internal feelings, as you walk into that room, having opened the door. What does the room look like? What can you see? Are there motes of dust? What is the old person sitting at the chair doing? And I want you to describe walking over to that person and telling them that the cook has burnt lunch, and the reaction. Now, this is an exercise that's going to take you maybe 5, possibly even 10 minutes. Don't hurry over it, because it's the detail and it's your own feelings that really matter. So we're going to put the screen on blank and let you write away 1 paragraph, maybe 2 if you like, but it's the detail I want to sense, and the mood and the sense of an older person. And you can be as young or old as you like yourself, but that person sitting at the window who is going to receive the message that their lunch has been burnt by the cook, they are an old person. Off you go. So how did that go? Was it a sense of awe or fear you felt? What was the conversation you had? Was it monosyllabic, or was it a longer conversation? How did it make you feel? The second part of this exercise is to work in a different way, to use the language to turn you into a reporter. So the last piece you wrote in the first person. This next piece, I want you to write in the third person. You are now a fly on the wall. You're a fly on the outside, watching the person who is outside the door, the you, knocking on that door and walking into the room and delivering the message to the older person that lunch has been burnt. As the observer, what are you thinking? You cannot tell what the other you has got in their mind, but you can read their body language. It's very important that you don't you don't overinterpret what you wrote in the first paragraph. Keep a distance, hold the story further away from you than you would if you're writing a first person. So be that reporter sitting on the wall, watching you, knocking on that door, going into the room. What can you observe? Do you hear a creak of the floorboards? Do you see the dust motes? Do you look and see whether the old man has a cardigan hanging over the back of his chair, or whether the woman has draped her scarf on the table? What can you see? Take what you've already written and construct a third person observational narrative. Good luck with that. Some people who don't really understand what we writers go through imagine that sitting in a cafe with a laptop and waiting for the muse and inspiration to come is how great books get written. But you know, and I know, that that isn't the case. It's all very well to have the words at your disposal, but how do you know you've got them in the right order? How do you know that the story that you think you are telling is really the very best version? Now, I've been writing for almost 40 years, and of the last 20 years, it has been a case of writing non-fiction for and about the Second World War and stories that come out of that era. And I find that for me, editing is where it's all at. So I do all my research. Sometimes I can take up to 3 years to research a book, and it's not a drudge, it's pleasure. I'm nosing around in those letters that I explained earlier. I'm looking at objects. I'm reading into photographs, details as much as I possibly can. But once I've got all that material together, I sit down and I write. Most of my books are about 100,000 words long, which is translating into about 360, maybe up to 400 pages. And once I've written my book, which generally takes me about 3 months from start to finish, that is when the creative process starts. And this is what I really cannot overemphasize enough. It's all about editing. It's crafting that language. It's using English to work for you. So once I've finished my book, and it's what my great friend and colleague Ian Marchant calls the shitty first draft, I leave it for a week. I walk away, I go and play in my garden, I go rowing, I do something that's absolutely got nothing to do with writing. And then I come back and I read these 110,000 words from start to finish with a strong cup of coffee and a tissue, because sometimes it's a bit anxiety making, and I read it. And the question I have in my head as I'm reading it is, have I got a story? And if I have, I'm pleased. But at that stage, I very often make huge changes. And I'm talking about, moving chapters around. It's a big structural movement. And then I walk away from it again, maybe for a day, after a process of, it takes a week to do that first edit. I come back after a day or two. And the next time I'm reading it for historical accuracy, which matters enormously to me. Now, if you're writing fiction, that doesn't matter. But nevertheless, if you're writing a fiction set in the 19th century, you can't have somebody jumping into a car, or at least not into an automobile. If it's a car, it's going to be horse-drawn. If you're writing about the Tudor times, you can't have mobile phones. Now, I'm being flippant, but tent pegs of history actually do matter, and they anchor historical and fiction into the era you're trying to create. So I read it for the history. Have I got that right? The next edit is the one I enjoy most, and it's what I call cadence. And this is a book that I published in 2020. It's called Dress for War, and it is the story of the wartime editor of Vogue magazine. Now, not necessarily a terribly promising topic, but actually she was a fantastic character. And what I needed to do in this book was to bring her out, to make her shine. She was a behind the scenes editor. She was a wordsmith. And she had in her galaxy of stars, some of the greatest creative minds that worked on Vogue. Two of the greatest were the photographer Cecil Beaton and the model turned photojournalist American Lee Miller. And both of them worked for Audrey during the Second World War. In order to bring Audrey to the fore, I needed to reflect on the cadence and how I was going to give the book rhythm that made my readers stop and start. It was terribly important not to let Cecil Beaton and particularly Lee Miller dominate. So when I got to an exciting bit where Lee Miller had gone into occupied France, she'd photographed at Saint Malo, she was about to go to Paris, which had just been freed by the Allies, and I stop dead there. I leave her in Paris and I come back to London because I need to focus the attention on Audrey. And that's what I mean by cadence. So cadence is vitally important. That's my third and most important edit. And then I edit once again. And I edit for phrases and words. And I get rid of excess adverbs. And believe me, I have many. I get rid of words that make me sound unsure of myself. Words like perhaps and nevertheless and therefore. Thus, those are words that we often use when we're not 100% certain of how we're writing, but they're words that to our reader sound hesitant. I shorten my sentences. I'm a great criminal. I write huge long sentences, sometimes 4 or 5 lines long, with lots of ands. At this moment, I remove those because short sentences can be very succinct and powerful, and varying the length of your sentence is also a good technique for changing the cadence. And the final edit before it goes to the editor. So remember, not a single person other than me, Julie, has seen this text. So this final edit is vitally important because it is what my friend Diane Setterfield, the novelist, describes as sprinkling the fairy dust. And it's replacing words. It's looking to replace the exact, to get the exact word that I want to spell something out. English is a hugely colourful language. And I tell my students at Oxford, if something is very, very hot, it's not very, very hot, it's boiling. If you're in the desert and it's very, very hot there, it's arid. There is always a beautiful word in English. Now we're going to show you a screen grab. Here it is, that my husband took of this biography of Audrey Withers. It was taken in June 2019, so a year before the book came out. And it was a screen grab of the book, edited from version 1, the shitty first draft, to version 6, which is what I sent the editor at Simon & Schuster. Look at the damage I've done to my writing. All the red is change. There's a huge section where I've simply removed text because it was superfluous. It's never wasted. No writing is ever wasted, but it is so valuable to be able to say, is this language working for me? Not have I written it right? Is my English good enough? That's critical. No, is the language working for me? The green is new text. It's words that I've decided to replace. It's sentences that I realized are stronger if I write them refreshed and in a new way. So my books go through a huge number of iterations, and it doesn't stop there. Once the editor has had his or her say, the book comes back to me. And in the case of Audrey, I'll be honest, he said, there's something missing here. I need to get a sense of her. I need to know whether she laughed and cried. What a wonderful challenge. So I rose to that challenge and I had great fun, and I went back through her personal letters and I found episodes in her life that could elucidate that. And I showed him her flaws and he liked that. And then the book goes to the copy editor, and the copy editor queries things. Have I got the name of Sir Henry Chips Channon right? And am I quoting from the correct diary? Is it true that Lee Miller flew into occupied France? Yes, I got that right. Don't worry, editor. So sometimes the copy editor is asking you a question that you know is correct, and at other times it's great that they're not checking for you. And then it goes to the proofreader. So I can read a book that I publish up to 16 times before it is read by you or another of my readers. And that's quite a lot. Certainly, I'm not suggesting you should reread and correct your first drafts 16 times, but certainly it is valuable to go back over your writing. So here's an exercise that's not dissimilar from the one we did at the very beginning of this class, but this time you're on your own. I'm not going to help you with words. I want you to write about a daily activity, something that's easy to describe, whether it's getting up in the morning, having your breakfast, whether it's preparing lunch, whether it's going for a walk. Describe this activity for me on a piece of paper with a pencil or pen. And I want you to write for 5 minutes without any punctuation, any capital letters, not a comma, not a full stop. One massive stream of consciousness, not a paragraph break. Go ahead and do that. Be brave. It feels very strange. You're going to want to put commas in and full stops. Don't. Just give us absolutely unadulterated stream of consciousness about a familiar topic. Off you go. Now, how long is that sentence? Pages long, probably. What you have got is the rawest of raw material, but it's something to work on. And now what I'd like you to do is to look at that handwritten document, and I want you to put in the punctuation and correct the spelling and shorten the sentences and indicate where you would put paragraph breaks in. So that is the first approach, just to tidy it up. And then when you've done that, I'd like you to reread it and look at it and say, have I repeated any words? Have I used the word very more than once? Could I find a more beautiful phrase to describe an aspect of what you have written? And again, I come back to this thing, you're looking to make English work for you. Make those words mean something. And this long, long, long sentence that you've written for me is suddenly going to turn into a little paragraph that you can craft and you can work on it. Now, some people will say you can overwork writing. Maybe you can. It's never been the case in my experience. But the more you test and tease that paragraph, and the more you work on it and you refresh it and you bring new words and phrases and cadence to it, remember I use a description of cadence, the more you will find that the voice that you're beginning to develop is confident in using the English language to your benefit and to your command. That is what this workshop has been about. It's about putting you in charge of the language, of taking that blank page and saying, this is not frightening because I am in command of language. I can tell a story. I hope you have great fun. I wish you the very best of luck with your writing, and I look forward to seeing you in print. Thank you very much for coming along, and thank you also to Chipping Norton Theatre for being so kind, and to William for doing all the technical aspect of this.